So the meeting today will be running for the whole day, and it divided into 3 different sessions. The session 1 is Urban Food Systems and Sustainability, which will be moderated by Dr. Philip from Sirat, Vietnam. And the second session is Developing Geographical Indications in Asia, and moderator is Alexander from the Agriculture Consular of the French Embassy to Vietnam. And the last session will be Cooperatives and Organizational Models, Marketing, Operations, and Benefits to Farmers, which will be moderated by Guillaume. So, but there will be 2 different arrangements. In the morning, it will be the presentations arrangement, and in the afternoon, it will be like a panel discussion. So I will give the microphone to Estelle, my colleague, to say some few words.
So thank you very much for joining us. We are very happy to have you here. It is the second edition of our annual scientific meeting for Malica. So as most of you know, Malica is a research platform in partnerships, which has been active in the country for about 18 years already. And it's a platform which is gathering Vietnamese partners that you can see here, but also Lao partners, which we are very happy to have with us today, and also international organizations and French organizations. Our research platform is basically working on food systems and sustainability challenges and sustainability pathways, so that's basically what you will see on our agenda for today. And we are working under 3 thematic areas. One is more orientating toward understanding agricultural transformations in relation with market changes. Another one is much deeply on the market restructuring and on the changes happening, especially from a quality perspective, quality standard development, etc., in relation with urban consumptions. And recently we've been incorporating more of a thematic topic on the impact assessments and on getting more evidence-based information, findings, etc., with regard to feeding into policy dialogues. Firstly at national level, and then more and more into feeding the needs for regional integration. Yeah. So thank you very much again for being here with us, and we hope you will enjoy the day, and we are looking forward for having very lively discussion with you today. Thank you.
Okay, good morning everybody. My name is Philippe Girard. I'm a Sirat Regional Director based in Hanoi. So I will rapidly introduce, because important is to leave the floor and to have time for discussion. So I will rapidly ask for the first presentation, which will be made by Yuan Chao from Favri and Mikhail from Sirat. The scope of this presentation is towards sustainable food system in Hanoi, drivers for change, and impact of urban drivers innovation. So please, I don't know who we will present, Michael or, yeah? So 20 minutes presentation, so 2 minutes before the end I will raise the hand, try to attract your attention for you to wrap up.
Okay, good morning everybody. So it's a pleasure to be here today. And so Sao will speak on the behalf of Sirat and Favri, because we are working together now for the past, almost past 1 year. So I'll just wait 1 second for this message to disappear. Okay. Okay, anyway, no worries. So we had a few projects that started at the beginning of the year, mostly, like 4 to 5 projects we are working on. So far, we don't have like results that can be. It's more like trying to draw a general presentation on the projects we are working on. And we try to do that in line with the concept of food systems. So you know that many research and development institutions now promote this concept of food system. So we wanted to take the opportunity this morning to define it a bit theoretically. We know that SIAT also is working on this, and so it's much more on the agenda of many consortiums. And Malica also, so it's trying to come into that field of food systems and sustainable food systems. So we still have a small problem here. Okay. All right, so I will first try to draw a general sketch of what we call food systems, and then we will try to situate, to locate our own research projects with Favri within this conceptual framework. So food system, it tends to be a quite holistic concept, a concept that, or perspective that integrates all the elements and activities that relate to production, processing, transformation, distribution, preparation, consumption of food, also the treatment of waste, usually, and also the input of these activities, the input, output, and outcomes. So, of course, it's obvious that food systems transition and transform very rapidly, which has important implication for many challenges, especially relating to sustainability. It's okay, Hong Sao. Come on. So, of course, the sustainability of food system depend on several drivers. And to achieve sustainable food system, we need to take into consideration specific impediments, specific obstacles to sustainable food systems. And generally, we consider that there are also outcomes to food systems. Here I quote some work from Patrick Caron from CIRAD and colleagues, stating that food system can contribute to nutritious and healthy diets, of course, then also environmentally sound ecosystems, of course, lesser impact to climate change, and then, of course, social justice and social inclusion. So I just to illustrate, we just put like two ways of mapping food systems. This is one from the high-level panel of experts on food security and nutrition. So you can see on the top the main drivers for changing food systems, like biophysical drivers, political drivers, demographic drivers, and so on. And on the bottom, rather, the main outcomes of food systems, so diets, nutrition, and then, of course, what relates to the Sustainable Development Goals, like most of you know them pretty well. This is from SIAT, you may recognize it, SIAT people. It's another way to map the food system, so with the drivers and the outcomes, and in between the main components of the food system. So what we want to do now is to illustrate this concept of food system by the case of Hanoi, and all that in line with the present project that we are carrying out with Favri. So first, very quickly, we will mention the main main drivers from transitioning food systems. And then we will just spend a bit of time on the main components of the food system in Hanoi and how they evolve. And then, based on our projects, we will just mention a few potential transformation for more sustainable food systems in Hanoi. So the main drivers, I go very fast through this, like socioeconomic transition, urban transition, agrarian transition, food transition. Most of you know a bit about this general context. So now, the food systems in Hanoi, their components, we mostly work on two main components of the food system with Favri. The first is like the supply chains or systems of food provision. And the other one is what we can call food environments or foodscapes or the full retail landscape. So first, what are the main changes regarding the systems of food provision? What we notice is an increase in long-distance provisioning, whereas in the 90s, Hanoi used to source most of its fresh food from the nearby districts and provinces. Now we notice that there are more and more counter-seasonal vegetables coming from Central Highlands, coming from China, coming also from Sonla. In the summer, most of the fruits come from the south, from the Mekong Delta. Shrimp also mostly come from the south. Beef comes from northern provinces, but also a lot of live cattle comes from Australia now, like 200,000 of heads of cattle reaching Hanoi alive from Australia every year. But still, the hinterland still plays an important role, especially in the winter for vegetables, like leafy vegetables mostly. For meat, pork, and poultry mostly are sourced from the surrounding areas. Sweetwater fish also, it's very mostly comes from Hanoi province, and to a lesser extent fruits, especially in the winter. What we notice also is that like the traditional circuits of food distribution still play an important role, especially wholesale markets are still very active. And there is no central wholesale market so far in Hanoi, and it's mostly like 7 to 8 spatially scattered wholesale market that bring the food to the city. And we also notice an increasing number of middle persons, such as collectors, circulating in the countryside, collecting vegetables from several farms and cooperatives, and bringing them to wholesalers. It's more and more rare that wholesalers themselves go to collect the vegetables, for instance, in the farms. So just to illustrate what we are working on, we did a few sketches, a few maps on the main supply chain. So this is something that we did with a French consulting group about vegetables. So trying to identify the main areas of production, the main flows, the main channels, the main places and main actors of these supply chains. We have the same for fish, trying to identify the actors and the main flows. And next map is the main wholesale markets in Hanoi. So you see that in green we have a fresh food wholesale markets, so selling vegetables, fruits, meat, fish. Most of them are like distributed all around Hanoi, and there are also some specialized markets for fish and live poultry mainly. Okay, so another component is what we call the food environment. Usually what we call the food environment is a combination of availability, accessibility, affordability, convenience, and desirability of different foods. So more or less it has two dimensions. One is like very physical. It means it's really like the retail system, so you can really map it. You know exactly where people have access to food. And the other one, it's more about the way consumers, the way people experience their food environment. It's where they go for purchase, what is their perception of this foodscape, how they practice it, how they experience it, how they navigate through it, based on their personal experience. So here we just want to give a focus on the system of food retail in Hanoi. And so what we notice is that the traditional urban distribution system seems to be quite resilient, because still a vast majority of the products go through this traditional system. Nobody already has the figures, but it's true that it's more than 85%, maybe 90 to 95 for products like fresh vegetables, for instance. And so there is still a dense network of municipal wet markets, a lot of so-called temporary markets, so taking place every day in the streets, but without any proper physical infrastructure. And of course, a lot of itinerant traders or frog markets, as we call them in Vietnamese. Chokok. Okay. And so with a student, in the framework of a project called Food to See, we mapped the system of the traditional system of distribution. So the two students just roamed around the full city to locate the main formal markets, informal markets, and main wholesale markets. So this is one of the outcomes of one of our projects. So these food environments still are changing pretty fast, because the traditional system is challenged by a modernizing political agenda. The municipality put a focus on connection to the international channels, so promoting imports and exports of fresh food, developing also ensuring food safety, and restricting street selling in specific places, and also with a will to close, to relocate, or to upgrade most of the traditional wet markets. And so this traditional system is also challenged by, of course, capitalistic investment, or maybe socialist market-oriented investments. And so what we notice is a boom in modern retail outlets, like more and more malls, supermarkets, and convenience stores. And especially, maybe this is epitomized by Vinmart Plus, which is like convenience stores mushrooming all over the city, and they now have more than 300 outlets in Hanoi. And they really try to focus on fresh food. They are maybe the first who really try to offer a broad scope of fresh products, and especially fresh vegetables, certified as safe. And they are selling their own brand, which is called Vineco. Some of you may know it. And also what is challenging this traditional system is the sale of food online. And we'll speak about it later on, because we have one of our projects on online sale of food. And now Sao will tell a bit more about the present project that we are carrying out within this context of food systems.
Yes, going for detail for the project we are doing from between Fari and Sirat now. Under the support of Malica, we will do some project related with the food system. And firstly, I would like to say about the street food. It's focused on the mentoring intra and peri-urban agriculture. We use wastewater and ponds to grow growing and farm fish. And in here we focus on tilapia. As you see in the picture, you can see under the Chungzung Bridge they are growing morning glory, and around Hanoi in Trung My district we can find the farm fish with tilapia in there. In this project, we focus on how we can make use of the rainfall, and we can use this one to be mitigating climate change by reduce the urban heat. From this, we're thinking about the impact of this project. It can bring for the short food supply chains, like vegetable and fish can grow and raise in or around Hanoi. It means it's very short distance from the supply to the consumption. So in here we can increase the fresh and the quality of fruit. Less transportation, it can be reduced the pollution from the car and transportation. In here also we thinking about the more revenue for the marginal farmers, because in here we can less intermediaries and the asset between the consumer and the supplier can be shorter, and it increase the revenue for the farmers in both for the consumer also. The less price can bring for more benefits for them. And the most important thing in here is we're thinking about the using wastewater. We're thinking about the raising tilapia in the ponds, which can be contaminated. It can be contain the human wastewater, human water. But in here, the problem is. Because it's around or in Hanoi, so the problem about the mental contamination can be the another negative impact from this kind of activities. So we have to thinking about both negative and positive impact from this one. And for the second project, we call Semaris. It will be blending a new wholesale market in Hanoi. To do this one, we did some interviews in some wholesale market, about five wholesale markets in Hanoi, doing with tilapia and vegetable. In here, we want to focus on how we can creating a modern agri-food platform and concentrate on the fresh food product. In here, we think about the potential impact of this activity. Okay. For this kind of project, we want to ask and we want to know the opinion of the wholesaler and also the government about how we can build a new wholesale market which can be adapted for the modern type of the wholesale markets, and also can be adapted for another benefit bring to social and for the actor in the chain. In here, we can adapt with the new type of model, we can adapt for traceability, quality of food, and can control the food safety issue. Both in here, we can bring the better price for producer and consumer. But in the wholesale market with the high control about the food safety and food quality, so the problem for small scale operators, can they involve in this kind of the modern wholesale market, and how they can compete with other like bigger wholesaler, or how they can access this kind of modern type of market. But the general idea about this one is we want to encourage and improve the capacity to compete between the independent operators with the supermarket chains, which are the most focused on by the higher level consumers, which they think about the food safety and quality of product. And another concerning in here is we thinking about how we can organize this wholesale market. When we talk with the wholesaler and we do interview, they always thinking about where it can be located and how we can organize to it can run better, and how we can encourage the people involved and work in their infancy. And another type of innovation we focus on is we call urban project. This one we focus on another type of buying and selling, use Facebook and some another app. It means we now it's not by the real or the traditional way people go to the market or the supermarket to buy directly food. This one people will use smartphone or computer. They can buy the product. So in here, social media and online will be promoted, but it means the consumer and supplier can directly interact between together, but it will be through the Facebook or Zalo or another kind of app. It can be bring for better buy and better access for consumer and producer. But the opportunity for the consumer can and supplier to connect and to reduce for the distance, it can be promoted. But in here, it can be have some negative impact because we didn't finish this one yet. So, but during the implementation, we realized that in here they didn't have any control. People just buying and doing by the trust and by themselves, so no one can control this one, and the quality of this kind of product and the difficulty to bring this kind of buying or selling to another people will be difficult. And another using of online platform is we call chợ nhà mình. It's also from another side of urban project, but this one with the control from DAC, Hanoi DAC. They create one online platform and they monitor this one, but this one didn't work in official yet. That's why we have to wait to see how it can be organized and how it can run in the next time. But anyway, we put in hypothesis about the impacts of this one. It can be it involves more for public governance. It bring more trust and enhance the role of public sphere in this activity, and because of the controlling from government, that's why the safety and quality of product can be improved. However, this because it didn't work yet, so we have to see how it can be work. That's all what we did with the 3 detailed project run by Fabri and Sirat. But from this this kind of activities, we're thinking about how we can try and how we can manage for food system in a sustainable. And we found that we need to investigate in traditional food system of food provision. And in here we focus on wholesaler and retailer, how we can reduce the gap between rural and urban area and bring opportunity for the rural development in distant province. Secondly, we have to think about the trade-off between different dimensions of sustainability, because if we want to, like in this picture, you can see it has many dimensions. So how we can balance and how we can make a policy to can get the best solution for our sustainable food system. If we focus on like economics, another thing like environment and the food security can be ensured. So in here it will be the question which we hope we can do after we have the result of our project. And in Hanoi, the problem is now we lack of intersectoral food policy that would address peri-urban agriculture connect between from production to consumption, and another dimension of sustainable like health, social and food security. Is raised the question is does in Hanoi we need to food department or food policy council as many another country in the world they are doing now, so we can control better and balance between the different dimensions of sustainable. That's we hope we can give the answer later after we do finish our research. Thank you for your attention.
My name is Isabelle Vagneron from CIRAD. I have maybe 2 remarks, very short, and 1 question. Remarks is about how I have some doubts about producing intra-urban or peri-urban morning glory that people would want to eat. That's 1 comment. And another comment is that I don't know about the Vietnam case, but in Yangon, they just built a new wholesale market, and we did interviews, and at the old wholesale market, people remain, and we asked them, why don't you move to the new wholesale market? It's big, it's clean, it's well organized, and they say, no, my customers are here, so there's some kind of inertia, because the new wholesale market is located far away, and it's difficult for people to move, and it's more expensive to have some booth. My question is about transportation and logistics, because when you have to bring food, sustainable food or safe food to the city from a distant place, you have to ensure that it goes through segmented chains and you can keep traceability. So is it something that you're going to be studying, or you intend to study, or you have studied? Thank you.
Still a lot of people eat morning glory that are being grown within the city or in the outskirts of the city. But so part of our project, we didn't mention about that, is that 2 biologists from France came to study like the potential genotoxicity of these urban environments. So they took some samples from tilapia and from morning glory all around the city. And so they are now presently, and also water samples, and now presently they are like analyzing these water samples to identify the trace metal elements, and also they compare like the different samples from Morning Glory to see where the environment seems to be the more toxic, and really to question this issue of is Morning Glory grown within the city safer or less safe than the one coming from distant provinces. And then, of course, yeah, regarding wholesale markets, so we are working with a French consulting group based in Rungis market in Paris. So they try to bring the expertise of Semaris, which is the society that's running the main wholesale market in France. And so, of course, so they're also aware of the fact that when you relocate a wholesale market, the main challenge is like to bring everybody together and to ensure that all wholesalers agree to move and use the new infrastructure. And they say like 50% of the projects of wholesale markets worldwide fail because like wholesalers don't agree to refuse to move. So it's something that we really have in mind. So that's why we did a lot of interviews with wholesalers to understand what are the impediments, the obstacles for them to move to the new place. So the new place has been more or less selected, but we can't really talk about it, and so far nothing is official. But especially in Hanoi, as now all the wholesale markets are very scattered, there is this issue of like being able to move. How will also the retailers access this new wholesale market? And also, of course, the diversions in terms of transportation, traffic, transit, and how to ensure traceability from this main wholesale market to the retail market. Presently, there is no traceability in this traditional food system, or very low traceability. So the idea is to enforce traceability, but really step by step, not to go too fast. Otherwise, it would exclude a lot of factors, and people will try to bypass this traceability. So what we try to do with this French consulting group is really to think about a way to improve traceability step by step, and to start with quite lower standards and then to accompany them into upgrading the standards gradually.
Is it new place? Is it the project can decide on that, or how would that happen? And another question based on the analysis you've made with the new, with the market system currently, with a lot of wholesaler and the distribution system and so on, how would you see the linkages between this new wholesale market with the existing one? What would be the idea behind that? Thank you. My name is Milan. I am new in the platform. I'm working for Ricolto recently. Thank you.
So actually for the past few years, maybe, I don't know, I think Alexandre knows that better than me, the municipality of Hanoi plans to open like a world-class, high-standard wholesale market. And I think the mayor of Hanoi went to France and visited Rungis, which is supposed to be the biggest wholesale market in the world anyway. And what he seems to want is that to have a Rungis, same kind of wholesale market here in Hanoi. And so now there are a lot of expertise going on, a lot of consultants, researchers involved in doing feasibility studies and so on. And so apparently the site has been chosen already. And as far as we know, the municipality wants to shift most of the wholesale activities in this new wholesale market. And so we benefit from the expertise of consultants that are carrying out this kind of project like all over the world. And what they mention is that when you open a new wholesale market, you need to close the other ones. So that could start with the ones that are located close from the new wholesale market. You can keep one open like at the other edge of the city. But step by step, the goal is to maybe to transform the present wholesale markets into retail markets, and to have only one main point that will be used as a wholesale market. So we are not involved in this part. It's mostly this French consulting team. But based on the discussion I had with them, that's what is being planned so far. Yeah, of course, the goal of this new wholesale market is also to accompany the growth of the city. I mean, the city is booming, it's sprawling, it's densifying, so there is a need, of course, of extending the capacities of the system of food provision. And so having one main central wholesale market, it could also, with a lot land extension capacity, which is not the case in the present wholesale markets. None of them can expand spatially, so they're already saturated. So the goal is to have like big land where you can start with a medium-sized wholesale market and step by step increasing its size following the growth of the city. Of course, I mean, what also we, CIRAD, try to offer in these consultants is that to ensure that this new wholesale market will not exclude any actor. And so far, the French group involved in this expertise seem also to be conscious of that and very aware of the fact that new wholesale markets can be exclusionary also. So what we try to do is to bring everybody together and to ensure that social justice is also achieved along with other sustainability goals such as food security, food safety, and so on. So we try to keep this balance in this new project.
Just two quick questions. First, I see that your thank you for the presentation, by the way. First, there's no mention of plastic waste. Chum, Oleg's assistant, just for short. First, I see there's no mention of plastic waste, which is like a serious problem now. And it seems like the topic is quite avoided in many discussions because in agriculture we want to have all this value chain and all the packaging that's needed for branding, to ensure the fresh product, increase quality of the product. But then it creates huge waste at many different kind of retailers. No matter where you go, supermarket, wet market, Facebook retailers, you always have plastic waste. So are we going to deal with this problem? And my note on that is supermarkets are not very good at that. No matter what you do, supermarkets always create lots of plastic waste. And wet market, even though they also have lots of plastic, they actually, it's easier for customers to use less plastic when they go to wet market. Because you can actually bring your own container from home. So is there any focus on wet market when you deal with this problem? Second thing is, is on the wholesale market. So I went to Brisbane in Australia last year, and the wholesale market actually is not just a place for people to make transactions. Actually, wholesale market there play an intermediation role between they actually ensure that they provide payment service, so they can ensure that the suppliers always get paid, and if the buyers don't get paid, then they will step out and kind of chase the other guy so that they make sure the suppliers got paid. And then they also monitor the transaction. So they offer actually lots of services to both sellers and buyers. And so if we move to the new wholesale market, do you think about that we can actually provide some extra service like that to compete with the traditional one? But then, and who will be the one that manage the new wholesale market? Who will have ability? Is it private sector? Is it the government? That's all. Thanks.
That's a lot of questions. I'll try to answer quickly. So regarding governance first, I mean, we are not involved in that so far. So maybe it's the municipality. Actually, it's a municipal project. It's a public project. So I guess the municipality already has in mind what they're going to do with that. So it could be something like a mix between public and private. I mean, it's sure that it will be partly public, but I mean, the goal is not to privatize it. But I'm not involved in that aspect, so I could not answer. Also, just maybe Alexandre knows more about it. And regarding the goal is not that the new wholesale market competes with the other wholesale markets. It's just like it takes them over. So the goal is to accompany the gradual upgrading of the present wholesale market to transfer them into a new one. But it's not to have a competition between the new one and the old ones. So the goal is to bring everybody together and to have the wholesalers move in a central place. And of course, in this central place, there would be more services and better interaction and better circulation of information, lack of less asymmetries of information, so also better price creation and so on. That's one of the philosophy of wholesale market in general. And last, maybe about plastic, you want to... we don't have any projects about plastics and and packagings and so on. But maybe Chilok, you can say a few words about some initiatives that have been recently taken in supermarkets, like using vegetable packages and so on.
Yes. Okay, so I just want to mention about the question of plastic waste, because as in the research we didn't study on this question, but through the observation we know about at the moment the modern channel uses much more the plastic for package, but in the Chinese market they use much more also. After the quick interview, we know the supplier used from 12 to 17 kg of plastic for package fresh vegetable per ton. So we thinking at the moment if all of consumer need the information, origin of information of the product, so the supplier have to use the package the same this way at the moment. I think it is a big question for plastic waste. Only that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I mean, there is, if we are able to save a little bit of time, there is a discussion at the end of the session this morning. So I would like to ask us for the second speaker, Ricardo Hernandez. He will introduce his paper regarding retail market assessment of nutritious fruit and vegetable in low-income urban, peri-urban area in Hanoi. So please, Ricardo.
Thank you, Philip. My name is Ricardo Hernandez, and I'll be presenting something that is also a bit of a work in progress still, which is a project about increasing the consumption of fruits and vegetables by low-income population in Vietnam, which in this case is Hanoi. So this component, what I'm going to present, is part of the project that we have that it's called the Fruits and Vegetables Intake in Vietnam and Nigeria. And the objective of this project is really to increase the intake of fruit and vegetables through food system innovations that will target improve the access, enhance the affordability of the products through client-specific coupon systems, and boost the acceptability of fruits and vegetables through promotional campaigns. So, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit sick, so I'm trying to be alive here. So this is interventions that will be designed in the second stage of the project. But in order to do this, first we needed to do a study, a baseline study about the situation of the consumption of fruit and vegetables. So in order to carry this study, we did this in 2 districts in 4 wards in Hanoi, in Dong Da, in Ha Dong, and the wards were Hang Bot, Ban Chuong, Bien Giang, and Dong Mai. The whole point is to really be able to look at the districts where there is more concentration of low-income population, and try to look at 2 different types of districts. One which would be more urban, established urban, and the other one more peri-urban, urbanizing new urban district, right? And in order to carry out the study, we even, when we chose our sample for the households, we make sure that the households, the income per capita was below 2.65 million dongs per month. Now this number doesn't come out of randomness. We just not like just pick the number using BHLS and looking at the different income quartiles for Hanoi, for the city, in 2016, and adjusting for inflation. Pretty much roughly this represents the lower 30% of the population. So this is how we choose this number. Now, as I am telling you, this is a study that will try to do market interventions. But the target population, it's the households within the districts. So in the work package 1, which is basically the baseline, we collected 5 different studies. 24-hour recall that was led by Wageningen University and Hanoi Medical University. and household questionnaire as well. I think that was with NIN. And a barrier and seasonality analysis that both of them were done by the National Institute of Nutrition with Biodiversity. And we, CIAT, were responsible for, this is not, the pointer is not really pointing, the MLA, which is basically the market level assessment. So part of this study is not just to look at the households, but also to have an assessment where these households buy the products. Since this is a project that is focusing on nutritious fruits and vegetables, we, well, before we go there, let me explain a little bit of what the market level assessment is. So basically this is a survey that we collect with different segments of the value chain, but in this case we only focus on retailers. So the first part of the assessment is really looking at the assets, the characteristics of the retailers, right? Looking what is the product that they do, that they sell, the location, what kind of assets do they have, what kind of even human and organizational capital they have, physical capital. Then, once you go beyond the assets, the second point is really what they do, right? The first point of what they do is how retailers buy, source their products, thinking more of how much they do they do any processing, who are they buying from, do they have main suppliers, what kind of standards they have with the suppliers or requirements, do they have any type of arrangements with the suppliers, and whether they provide services to the suppliers as well. The third point will be, well, once they bought the products, do they do anything with it? Do they process it? What kind of added value provisions they do to the products they have? And then the fourth point is really thinking about how they sell, right? So this is very similar to point two, is thinking about how much they sell, who do they sell, who are the main sellers, do they have any arrangements with the sellers, standards, provision of services. So this is basically what the MLA is trying to collect. Now, as I was trying to say before, because this project is really about the increasing the consumption of fruits and vegetables, nutritious fruit and vegetable, then we selected 30 different products. This is an ongoing work that we did with Wageningen and with NIN and HMU, looking at consumption studies in Vietnam before, looking at our own 24-hour recall. Why we did this, by the way, looking at different studies and also looking at things that we have done before, is because when you see 24-hour recalls, usually they are snapshots, but in a particular time of the year, right? It's a 24-hour recall. It's only about the consumption of the past 24 hours. So we really wanted to look at different studies that were collected through different times of the year, because we didn't really want to run the risk of being affected by seasonality, right? Thinking that the 24-hour recall says these are the products that are being consumed or under consumed, and maybe we are neglecting other products that were not consumed in that particular point of time. So after a long iteration of work, we end up with a list of 30 different products that were 8 fruits and 22 vegetables. So they were fruits, dark green leafy vegetables, vitamin A rich vegetables, and other vegetables. And here are the list of all the products that were considered for the market level assessment. I must be completely candid and honest. I don't know many of these vegetables myself. Even the English names confuse me. But hey, in Vietnam they do consume a lot of dark green leafy vegetables, which is not surprise. So these are the products that we selected for the study. And then, okay, just before that. So what we did is that first we went to the wards. We did a census of all the retailers that were present in the wards. Looking at the household questionnaire and the 24-hour recall, we also were able to assess where our households, the households in our sample, buy the products from. So in order to see whether, we are missing any market. So at the end, after we did the census, then we did a random sample in both districts, in the 4 wards, in order to randomly select retailers in order to be able to interview them. Now, for each retailer, we asked them about 5 products, right? Because in the census, we collected information, retailer A sells, whatever, only fruits, 10 different fruits, the other one sells this, that, and that. So we were able to get a census of all the retailers with all the products that they sell, but particularly focusing on these 30 products that were of interest for the project, right? So then we can randomly select retailers and the products that were going to be interviewed by retailer. So each retailer, we asked about 5 different products. And this is the distribution of the sample. Between mom and pops is basically a family-owned convenience store, formal wet market, and informal wet market in the 2 districts. We also, in these wards, we found one that was randomly selected, modern convenience store, but since we only had one, I decided to drop it from the analysis because it doesn't really make any sense. So I'm going to show you the preliminary results from our survey. First, thinking about gender and age, this is not surprising. Also, you see that the great majority of retailers are women, regardless of the retail type, right? And their average is between 47 years old, basically. Most of them have some sort of education between primary and secondary. There is not much really above high school. And as you can see, they're pretty much evenly distributed also within the different markets, retail types, sorry. Now, this we ask a question about volumes. What is the volume that they sell now compared to what they sold 5 years ago, weekly volumes, and also in both the high and the low season, right? So this was a bit surprising to me because pretty much all of them say that they used to sell a lot more 5 years ago than what they sell now, with the exception with the family-owned convenience store. Now, the mom and pops, they apparently sell pretty much a little bit more now than they did before. And also, the information about the average maximum and minimum volumes that they have per week in kilograms in the high season. And this is also something that I was expecting, really, because we asked information about waste. What's the percentage of waste that they have both in the high and the low season? And you see that it goes from 2.3% to around 6%. And I think this is something that I personally was expecting. This sort of result. First of all, we're talking about highly perishable products. So as an average, this seems fine to me. And obviously, formal wet markets and informal wet markets have less waste than a family-owned convenience store, which also makes sense given the volumes that they sell, right? The lower volumes, you have less amount of clients, there is a higher chance of you having waste than if you are in a market. Where are they buying from? Where are they procuring? Who are the suppliers? So this is really not surprising that the retailers are basically saying most of the product that we buy it from wholesalers, from the wholesale market. But there is a considerable share of people who also buy directly from farmers. And some, especially in the informal wet market, have their own production, right? They also source from their own products. Now, do they provide any services? You know, as a retailer, do I provide any services to the supplier? Well, the main service that they provide is transportation. Whether it's my own transportation or I arrange transportation. Do I really need the microphone? I think I'm very loud anyway. This is a bit distracting for me, but so they do the transportation arrangements for the suppliers. What do they receive in return? So this is a more varied, display of services that they can receive from their suppliers, but mainly we're talking about sorting is one of the main things that they receive. Sorting, packaging, so you see that there are many shares that are quite high. Again, these shares do not have to add to 100%, right? Because a given retailer might respond that he or she in this case actually, receives many different services from their suppliers, right? It doesn't have to be one. So we collected all the services that they responded. So you can see here, packaging, sales on credit, sorting, there are many of them that are pretty high share of the retailers who claim that they receive the services from their suppliers. Complaints, this is interesting, I guess. We asked, in the past 12 months, did you have any complaint about your suppliers? Did you complain about the products? And the great majority says yes. 2 minutes, oh wow, I was going slow. And the reasons for complaint, they're varied. There are many different types of complaints. Now the clients, right? Who are they selling to? The main clients that they sell, obviously, is directly to consumers, but you see that both formal and informal markets do sell to other people, right? To traditional markets or street vendors. Have they had any complaints? Yes, pretty much all of them. Have they had any rejections? Yes. And the reasons for the rejections usually have to do about the physical quality of their products, in most cases. Do they hire labor beyond their family? Not really, not much. This is interesting, the share of traders that have family members as traders as well. You see that both in the informal and the formal market, there is a small share of people who said that have family members who are also traders in different markets. And then the last question that I wanted to analyze, because, Brice thought that would be very interesting, is asking, if you have to leave for a week from your stall, how much money do you, would you be able to leave your stall for a week? Which gives you a little bit a sense of their knowledge about their income, right? Of the sales that they have per week. And not surprisingly, the formal wet market is the one that has a higher, here is the one that also has higher volumes of sales. Just to, I don't want to call it conclusions because this is work in progress. Part of this analysis is really trying to do this analysis by products, right? I just did a summary right now about everything, but right now we are in the process to do the analysis by different types of products, as you saw there. Fruits, dark green leafy vegetables, and probably other vegetables will be the categories that we're going to use. There are not really many differences across the retailers by the type when you think about gender, age, and education. They mostly say that they used to sell a lot more before, with the exception of the mom and pops. And waste is relatively low, considering that these products are highly perishable. Transportation is the main services that they receive, and sorting and cleaning is what the suppliers provide to them. Retailers mainly buy from wholesalers and farmers, and they mainly sell to direct consumers. So this is my presentation. Thank you very much. And I thought I was going to have a lot of time.
No, it's okay, but it's perfect. It's 20 minutes, so we have time now for questions. So a few questions and first I would like to ask to comment. Sorry,
Thank you very much, Ricardo, for this presentation that I found very interesting, and especially in light with what was previously presented by Michael. I think these two studies blend together. I don't know what are your plans to discuss the results or the methodology or how it goes, but you know, the map you presented and the study, I think these are quite interesting. I'll do very quickly. I have just a few questions. You say that the retailers source mainly from farmers and wholesale markets. In the case of sourcing from farmers, do you know how far this is? In terms of kilometers and where, I mean, do you have spatial information about where they source the products from?
I don't recall that we have information about kilometers, but we did ask where is this product coming from, and we ask about information about the district. So we will not have exactly, you know, a distant measure, but a proxy of how far the different products come from. But let me be clear of this, because we're thinking about only these 30 target products. I am more than sure that the dark green leafy vegetables come from around Hanoi, right? Yeah. Because these are fresh products that are consumed here.
Okay, and then I have just a question about clarification in terms of the services that are received and provided. Mm-hmm. What I don't understand is why transportation is considered as a service provided, because if they just go and get it. Okay, so I would say that when I read the table, I thought, okay, service provided is the wholesaler or the retailer bringing the goods to the consumer. But what you're saying is that it's transportation between the supplier and the retailer.
So we ask for services in both sides, right?
Yeah.
So one is thinking about who are they buying from, which is the wholesaler mainly, or farmers, and who are they selling to. And for both the relation with the actors, whether they provide any service or they receive any service. In this case, think about that retailer, they, as you say, they go and buy, right? So they don't get, the wholesaler doesn't deliver in their stalls, so they have to go and buy. So in that sense, they provide the service of transportation, right? Or they arrange for the transportation services. Here, I have not been able to do the analysis of the data yet because this is very recent, but part of the survey was also asking information about the last transaction. When we will be able to analyze that section, we will have more clear details about who pays for the services, whether it's the wholesaler or is the retailer or the farmer, because you know it could be from many different sources, and how much it costs, and also who pays for it, who's responsible for it. So as I'm saying, this is very preliminary yet. This is more direct questions that we ask directly to the retailers, but we do have other sections in the questionnaire that hopefully would shed more, you know, detailed information about the service provision.
Alexandre Bouchot from the French Embassy. Did you ask what kind of services added services they would need? Did you ask if they need some cold chain services, some waste collection services, or did you just ask the services they get already?
Yes. Yes. I think that's the second one is. So what we ask is, given our experience, we ask about the different services that they provide and service, and we only allow for them to basically say anything else, right? Other services that are received. I do not believe we ask whether they will need, what will they need? No, I don't think that was part of the scope.
Yes, sorry. My name is Hoàng Thanh Tùng. I come from Vietnam Academy of Agricultural Sciences. And I just have maybe two small questions. The first one is, I want to ask you, why do you to choose study to increase food and vegetable consumption? Do you think that is when we consume more food and vegetable is good for our health? And maybe the other question is that, what is the key reason for people who eat or not eat food and vegetable? Why they eat or why they not eat? Maybe it's from the research. I think it's quite interesting information. Thanks.
Okay. Yes. Maybe I should have added that explanation at the beginning of my presentation. The whole project, the idea of the whole project is because when you look at consumption data in Vietnam, the WHO recommendation about daily consumption of fruits and vegetables is 400 grams. Vietnam, the average is around 251. So people here underconsume vegetables a little bit. They have a great diversity, diet diversity, because in Vietnam there is a good diet diversity, especially if you compare it with other countries in at least South Asia and Southeast Asia. But there is the consumption is not that low. I mean, there are worse countries than here, right? But is lower than the requirement. Now, why people do not consume enough fruits and vegetables? I think that the reasons are very varied. Fruits, if you think about, I mean, and this is really common knowledge, is that first of all, fruits are expensive here, right? Compared to vegetables, fruits are a lot more expensive. And if you think about orange flesh type of fruits are not cheap either. Mangoes, for example, are more expensive than other types of fruit. So you see, like here we try to avoid going like for watermelon, for example, because as the name says, it's mainly water. So we were really looking for more nutritious fruits and vegetables that will help meet the nutrition deficiencies that are found in Hanoi. Now, vegetables, there are many different reasons why. There is a lot of consumption here of vegetables, right? It's actually vegetables is the one that are better off. But you have to think about, for reasons that have to do not really about affordability, but thinking about the availability sometimes of different types of nutritious vegetables through the year is one of the problems. And I will say has to do a lot with the cultural practices, especially in low-income areas, right? And this is another thing. Please remember that this is a snapshot not of Hanoi, right? We really try to focus on low-income population, right? And believe me, that's hard to find in the first place in Hanoi. We're doing this project in Vietnam, in Hanoi, in these 4 wards, and also in Nigeria. And the difference between the 2 countries is really mind-boggling, right? Because in Nigeria, they're basically consume 3 things: bell peppers, tomatoes, and onions. They don't really consume anything else. Here, the diversity is a lot bigger, but although the average is high for the population, especially in Hanoi, looking at low-income population is a bit different, right?
Okay. Yeah,
no,
but if we...
I'm not the moderator, so I don't know. Should I pick who's asking me
question? We ran out of time already, so I don't... It's if we want to...
Sorry, I talked too much.
No. So all the presentations are very important, very interesting. That's why. But it's always interesting, and we do expect to have some discussion afterwards. But I think it's already over. So maybe I will ask Fred Hunger from Hillary to come, and he will present his paper on Safe Pork project funded by ACR on food value chain assessment.
Good morning to all of you, and first of all, thanks to the organizer to have a chance to speak at this meeting. I will give you some insights on our Safe Pork project, which is basically an intervention project to make pork safer in Vietnam. Pork is an important component of the Vietnamese consumers. You can see on this slide we have 29 kilo per person per year, around 27 million. You have to admit, due to African swine fever, this might be just 22 million. There's more than 5 million have been killed very recently or died due to ASF. 80% comes from small-scale farms. Once again, this proportion might be now much lower, as in particular small-scale farms and medium-scale farms were hardly affected by ASF. 76% goes through small-scale slaughterhouses and 80% through traditional market change, as there's a strong preference for fresh, warm pork. Food safety is an important issue of the Vietnamese consumers, more important than health and education. Exports are relatively well managed, but there are some deficits on the domestic market. Let me just give you an overview on our work in Vietnam on pork. And the pork value chain all started with a pig competitiveness project, and it showed that the small-scale sector is competitive. Then we had a pig risk project, was basically an assessment, and now ongoing the Safe Pork project. All of that is funded by ACR, and I'm very happy that Nguyen is here, the country representative for ACR. We have aligned activities, of course, policy engagement and capacity building on risk assessment, trainings, and scientific evidence. A lot of papers have been published. And now to the two projects, specifically on food safety. The Safe Pork Pig Risk Project started in 2012 and lasted until 2017. It was in two provinces, Hoang Nguyen and Nghệ An. It focused on the research question, is pork safe? And the methods used was a value chain assessment, a quantitative microbial risk assessment. Cost of foodborne diseases were also calculated due to hospitalization, and we did also a cross-contamination study to simulate the situation as a household level. All this was done from farm to fork. And the main hazards there were salmonella, and for microbiological hazards, and growth promoters, antimicrobials, and heavy metals for chemical hazards. Since 2017, we moved to Safe Pork, and here's the research questions. What are feasible interventions to improve the safety of pork? Methods used is here a food safety value chain performance assessment for key pork value chains in Vietnam or in Hanoi and the study areas. And of course, as I say, the food safety interventions and the strong focus on risk communication. I will tell you why in the next slides. And this project is in basically 5 provinces. Here are the results from pig risk, from the chemical risk assessment. The risk due to chemical hazards is low, and that includes heavy metals, growth promoters, and antibiotics. We sampled, or we tested more than 500 samples. However, for the microbiological risk assessment, the results are quite different, and that's also very much in line with the international literature. Salmonella contamination started here at farm level already, and you can see at the retail level here 44 up to 83% across different retail types contaminated with salmonella. So there's a clear misperception of Vietnamese consumers towards chemical hazards. Well, the microbiological hazards is what makes you sick. We do one step further, not just an assessment or not just a hazard assessment, we also calculated or modeled the risk for the pork consumer, and 1 up to pork consumer out of 10 per year are expected to suffer from salmonella causing foodborne diseases. And based on that, we also calculated in a parallel study the hospitalization cost for foodborne diseases, and you can see an average, that's an average, $107 per treatment episode for hospitalization have to be paid. So what we can say, is pork safe? Unfortunately, pork is not safe, and now the Safe Pork is addressing this through interventions along the pork value chain. Let me show you one more calculation we did, in particular also to support or convince policymakers. Vietnam has 94 million people. We expected 16 million cases of salmonella-caused foodborne diseases based on our quantitative macro risk assessment. Just assume only 20% get really hospitalized, so that means 3.2 million cases. Cost is $107 per treatment, so it would lead to 342 million. And let me see, this is working fact. And it just, let's again assume 20% our intervention reduces the foodborne diseases by 20%. We will be able to save $60 million. And this does not include the cost for treating of cases which are not hospitalized, which is quite common. Now let's come to the Safe Pork project. To the for the results we have. The first step was the assessment of the food safety outcomes of existing value chains, because the first project focused on traditional pork chain. Now we included key pork value chains in the 5 provinces we worked, including Hanoi, traditional wet markets, street food canteens, boutique shops, for instance, like Baktom, supermarket, and native pig, also basically Hoabin indigenous pig systems. And here are some of the results. Unfortunately, found poor food safety outcomes for salmonella across all retail types. Let's put it like that. Some retail types were a little bit better, but not significantly better. Trust in food safety was higher in rural areas and at the producers' end than in urban areas and at the consumers' end. Consumer trusted television and radio much more than social media and when distributing food safety information. And the value chain actors relate safe pork, and that's a bit what I mentioned before, not using antibiotics and growth promoters as unsafe pork rather than, in fact, poor hygiene during the processing of pork and selling of pork. Now to the interventions. Various approaches have been used, often basically copied from the system and used in developed countries, like good animal husbandry practices, traceability, certification schemes, particular modernizing retail. However, safe meat production has not really taken significantly. As you can see, its weight gap is less than 10% related to the pork chain. And the key constraints are clear. In fact, it's a high cost of adoption and a lack of benefit, also really a direct incentive. To overcome that, we raise our focus in our project on gradual improvements of the food safety in place and not, for instance, the infrastructure change. We focus on rather simple interventions, and of course, we really want to see how that aligned with any kind of incentive. To give you an example, which was at the end of peak risk, in fact, it was a tailored grid. It cost around $400 US. It was designed with a slaughterhouse man. And we could show that this simple measurement improves the hygiene already significantly. However, you can see the way they slaughter, it's very difficult. It disturbs basically the slaughter flow. So that they lost time and were at the beginning not very willing to change praxis. However, when we visited this slaughterhouse again after some years, or also 1 year later basically, he has changed the whole system. He has really invested, and what was really the driver? It is not necessarily the money. He cannot really sell the pork more expensive, but he got a positive signal from the private sector, in this case a Korean canteen, that they were attracted by the way he slaughtered when using a grid, and of course have invested a bit in the slaughterhouse. How we actually approach our interventions. The first thing is we select a suitable value chain. We can, of course, not do across all value chain. And which point of the value chain? The point will be slaughterhouse and retail. We use the participatory diagnostic, which is basically a strong participatory approach to discuss with value chain actors using food focus group discussion or key informant interviews. On the actually way what we want to do, we also explored barriers and enablers for potential interventions. We did some supporting research. One is so-called from behavior economics, nudges, I will explain later. And another one is the system effect model and lab trials, which basically supported the selection of certain retail interventions. And the intervention trial will be, of course, the final aim, and it has just started. Simple rapid test kits, that was what we want to look for. We tested what is, for instance, available at the market. Unfortunately, this food sniffer is not very promising. We got really controversial results. It looks very smart, but the results are not promising, so we really cannot promise that even it's not really expensive. Another thing we will start in December is to reduce antimicrobials in pork, replacing by probiotics. This will be as a control group, treatment group, with antibiotics without, and instead of that probiotics. This thing has been a bit delayed, you can imagine, because of African swine fever. We need a 4-month trial, a 5-month trial, and of course we want to be sure that the pigs are not just dying during the trial. Another thing which has been just implemented is the use of ozonized water, and this is one slaughterhouse in Soksan. Ozonized water is a very strong disinfectant, stronger than chlorine, and that just basically disappears after a few minutes. And it's connected to the main water supply. Surely it has to go along with also hygienic changes in the slaughterhouse. You cannot just ozonize water and think everything is going to work. So the slaughter slow will be also changed in this slaughterhouse. And this is a bit a better off slaughterhouse, so he has also some chance to co-invest. One more thing, and this is really a small-scale slaughterhouse and a really simple slaughterhouse. Basically, it was initially also a lift-up slaughterhouse, although it was upgraded from recent World Bank initiatives, but the situation was not that promising, and found a lot of contamination in pork. What we did with the slaughterman, and he is with the slaughterhouse owner, and he is very, very motivated to work with us, and I think that's one of the key criteria to select. This is not always randomly. We use an elevated grid as we have good experience, and we change the workflow for slaughter. And you can see this is a plan. Pigs coming in from here, moving in the dirty area. He will slaughter it here. Intestine will be removed here, and then they move a step up. There's a kind of barrier to the clean area for handling cutting the pork, and then it goes here and goes out. It's not an easy way, but I think it's the best what you can do under these circumstances. And this has been basically, the grid is currently built. The slaughterhouse owner is willing to co-invest, and he has, as I said, strongly agreed to work with us here. And the good thing with that slaughterhouse, the slaughterhouse is linked to a market in Tianlu. So what we of course want to do, we want a slaughterhouse linked to a market, and this is the case here, which is not easy at all, as traceability is really an issue. And this is what we want to do at the retail, and that, I have to admit, hasn't really started yet. Where we do it, again, I say in Tianlu, this is a linked slaughterhouse, a linked market to the former slaughterhouse. Also, some of the retailers buy pork from this slaughterhouse, not all. And what we use here is antimicrobial cutting boards, cutting clothes. They always use a cutting clothes to swap permanently the carcass, as well the surface of the stall and the cutting board, and you can imagine the same cutting board, the same clothes the whole day. It's really a big issue in terms of cross-contamination. So this will be provided, and we also try to do a frequent washing and disinfection of hand and cutting boards with a bucket and water, and surely the test to align with training. This is probably the most difficult part. This will be done in also, let's say, scientific approach. So we will involve traders, 5 traders at the beginning, 20 not, then 10, 10, 15, 5, and then finally all traders, as we feel that traders might be demotivated if we just start with some traders and you exclude other traders. We had just done the baseline, so the intervention should start as early as November. Indicators will be like for other interventions, the coliform load, and as well the observational checklist, and to see what is the actually praxis change. One of the supporting lab trials is we tested available commercial cutting boards for their antimicrobial efficacy. We tested 5. One is not pictured here. That is what the retailers actually use, a very fat, also thick one, strong one for heavy cuts. These are, in fact, surprisingly, I just found they're available, most of them even are available here in Vietnam, most recently. What we found, 2 cutting boards are very promising, basically the bamboo one and this microband cutting board. Surely you can imagine some of this is not really suitable for heavy cuts as a retail level. One more, yeah? 2 minutes, okay, really? Okay, almost there. Assessment of potential nudges. This is a new thing from behavior economics. Basically, this is an indirect force to you to do the right thing, and what we're using this for posters, positive messages we found have to be blue or green, negative messages have to be razor red, and this will support our interventions in each of the, at the retail level and slaughterhouse, and you can see this is a slaughterhouse, so we place positive posters, negative posters related to the workflow they have actually and the wall and the place we're working with them. One more thing, we plan to work with consumers. It's aligned to another project, basically on using the 5 keys of WHO on more hygienic food handling. Another thing we just discussed yesterday was another upcoming food safety initiatives from Canada. They're very much interested in branding, and of course we also want to signal safer pork to the consumer, and one of the options is branding. And the last thing here mentioned is animal welfare. We found really strong deficit at the slaughterhouse level. This is sometimes very frustrating, I have to admit, what is going on the slaughterhouse. We found some perception at market level, at producer level. You think these pigs, for instance, get classical music and have really nicer way how they keep them. This is basically a kind of boutique shop farm. What we have done here is a literature review and first observational study. One thing I just want to mention that policy translation, the research team, I think CWAT was as well involved in other institutions, the recent challenge opportunity, the food safety risk assessment report for Vietnam. And you can see here the Deputy Prime Minister was attended that meeting when it was launched. And this led, in fact, also to a new food safety initiatives at 4 urban centers from the World Bank. So what we can conclude here, pork is not safe. Modern retail is not necessarily safer than traditional retail, and microbiological hazards are more important than chemical hazards. I think the government needs to pay also more attention to the informal sector or to the traditional sector. Technical innovation needs also praxis change and incentive, and risk communication messages have to be really addressed to the tailored audience on the most trusted channels. And this is the last slide. So when we let's say summarize everything, intervention have to be evidence-based, implemented in a strong participatory process, intensified, razor simple and cost-effective. I think our PhD student presented yesterday something here yet. Innovative and scalable. And if you want to read more, of course, there are 16 peer-reviewed papers, and they're online on this web link. Yeah, thanks for your attention.
Thanks, Fred, for your presentation. Interesting. Perfect.
Thank you very much for very interesting presentation, because you provide lots of information that we are very interested in this kind of report. So for the good boy, I didn't want to mention here, but I want to see some something you discussed in the report. The first thing I think that's because we use a value chain approach. You see, the value chain we start from the farm to the table. I mean, that's a farm to the slaughtering house to the cooking, and finally we can serve for the consumer. So in the research, I think that you also mentioned to check what stage will be more infected by microbial. I think that is very important. So my question is, in terms of market incentive for the people who involved in the value chain. So what kind of incentives does people? I mean, that's what kind of motivation of people when they try to produce a safe pork for the people? Because I see many cases that sometimes they because profits, they try to do something very quickly and they don't follow the procedure. So that's why they cannot keep the safe pork here. So do you have any ideas about this? Thank you.
I think one example I have given to you is from the slaughterhouse. The incentive here was basically just a signal to the Samsung canteen that he has changed the slaughter process, I think. And again, this is not necessarily more, he didn't get more Vietnam dong per kilo pork, but he increased, the demand was increased from the private sector. Instead of 20 to 30 pigs, he can sell now 60 to 80 pigs, and most of that goes to the Samsung canteen. And they were really attracted by these slaughter grids. I have to be honest, of course, it has to be also measured how much that actually is it really safer over time? But definitely a slaughter grid is better than a slaughter on the floor. And for the retailers, I think what we believe, and that's a bit the branding thing, we believe as soon this can be signaled and the consumer is able to see the difference and can decide this pork is safer than other pork. But that is very difficult. This has to be done with a brand or certification. You know, there's also an issue with certification. Not all certificates are trusted. So this is, in my opinion, a nice brand would be good. Maybe start small for a value chain which is very linked, and probably also with attractive posters. And I have seen examples even recently when we were at the Australian embassy, discussed with some of our partners. They found just in Hung Yen a kind of a new outlet at the market level, and they attract a lot of customers. Simple with a kind of branding, something like that. But of course, they're not really providing details on their food safety outcome. What I could believe could work as well, which basically is the boutique shops are using, traceability. You can say you have a picture of your original farm of origin or this kind of thing, or you have an app or whatever, that the consumer can see, well, these pigs come from here, or these pigs go through that slaughterhouse, or something like that. I think that could increase trust. That would be our opinion, our approach. Basically, hopefully, a brand has to be linked. Otherwise, it will be, of course, if you cannot signal better pork to the consumer, then it may fail.
Thank you for your presentation. Just a small question. So where all these bacteria come from? Do they come from the farm? So were the pigs that were delivered to slaughterhouse were already infected by Salmonella? Because when I Google, it seems like the pigs would show no symptom, even when they're infected. So is there any control at the farm level? Because even if you keep the slaughterhouse clean, if the whole batch of pork coming in is infected, then keeping your slaughterhouse clean would means nothing. So
no, means nothing. I have to admit, it means a lot, in fact. Surely a farm is infected. We did it on pig risk. We found 20%, for instance, in drinking water at the farm level. You have to focus, you have to use a risk-based approach, where is the highest chance to change the situation. At the farm level, it's certainly more difficult, and you cannot really follow up the pig carcass. Yeah? So we found, and it is even internationally used, that slaughterhouse is the main point of cross-contamination, and then retail level again. So, of course, we're not looking for zero prevalence for Salmonella. When we have now 60 or 50, 60%, I think we target something like minus 30, 40%. If we can reduce Salmonella by half, which is very optimistic, then I think we have reached our achievement. You can see the calculation I did. Yeah. So a proper hygiene at a slaughterhouse, you see, we had at the farm level maybe 20%. It jumps up at the slaughterhouse to 40, 50%. If we can reduce this up jumping to 40, 50% at the market, maybe to 60, 70%, then you have gained a lot already. There is no zero risk, at least not in this region.
Thank you, Fred. I'm Guillaume from CIRAD. Thanks for your nice presentation. Coming to that point, Salmonella bacteria, you propose a very nice cost assessment of the Salmonella-borne diseases and the impact of human health. It was not clear in your presentation if you worked on consumers' practices and restaurants' preparation practices, because Salmonella is killed at 65 degrees. So if we eat buncha,
sure,
it's killed, simply killed. So it's just to have an idea on your research on that issue.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a bit like pasteurization. Yeah, your milk is contaminated, but you pasteurize. This is a cross-contamination. The first slide I showed, or whatever, on the Take Risk project, we simulate cross-contamination at household level. With using the same cutting board, the same knife, not washing hand, and this kind of thing. Of course, you cannot really do at household. That's very difficult. But we simulated a relatively realistic scenario how contamination could happen at household level. And you would be surprised. They're using the same cutting board for the raw pork. Then basically the pork is cooked. Then it comes back to the same cutting board. And then it's not really washed in between. And then this cooked cutting board, this cooked pork is cutted, in fact. And then the contamination is already happy. You're right, 70 degrees, 1 minute is more than enough. But the cross-contamination is a big issue, and we found even from the quantitative marketable risk assessment that the cross-contamination household level is an important contributor to the overall zero prevalence. I mean, maybe the most important, of course. Yeah. But not at the restaurant, that we don't do. But for household level, yes, we did that for the cutting boards. That was the reasons we want to introduce these hygienic cutting boards.
Alex from the French Embassy. Actually, I'm a vet by training, and I'm a civil servant in France. And in the EU, food safety is the responsibility of the producers, firstly, but then it's the state who is in charge. And we are speaking about food safety now, and we didn't speak at all from the official controls and so on. So,
you want a comment on that? I mean, as you know, the capacity is limited, I think, to make surveillance and official controls at the slaughters. Of course, you have two things. You have the lack of meat inspectors, but even then, we have meat inspectors. They probably not always implement or they not enforce, in fact, the regulations. So that's a big issue. But even for the meat inspector, of course, salmonella you wouldn't see. Maybe you can do some macroscopic meat inspection. But I think it's a long way to go. So I think from our side, what we can do to seek support from the local authorities to support our activities. And basically it has to come, as it is now, first of all, from the value chain actors. As I think the enforcement of regulations is still a little bit limited, as you know. I mean, it's not Europe. I mean, yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. This is basically just we want to show options, and we hope, of course, that other projects, much bigger projects like the Canadian one, or maybe even the World Bank projects, are able to pick up some of these things to scale up together with the government.
Just for curiosity's sake, right? Yes. I wanted to know, when you talk about the focus group discussion, who were the stakeholders involved? How did you handle the discussion? Because you rightly stress about the importance of participatory approaches, so I'm curious about how you proceeded with that.
Yeah. There are two different things. For the food safety performance tool, we did focus group discussions, a gendered focus group discussion, also with women and men, separated in basically with producer side. For producers, it's quite easy. What we found for slaughterhouse, almost impossible. For slaughterhouse, you move to a key informant interview. And as well for the retailer level, it is also, we found it very difficult to gauge the retailers to do from our side. So we usually do key informant interviews with them and not necessarily focus group discussions. But the focus group discussions were here mainly done with, same for consumers. Consumers was a key informant interview. You cannot really gauge the consumers. At least we found it more difficult for these other groups than for producers. For producers, again, we had between minimum 8 up to 15 people, gendered, also men, women, and also one facilitator and one note taker, and of course the usual thing, try to avoid that some people is too much leading or something like that. Yeah.
Thanks. I think we can have 10 more minutes. I don't know if there are more general questions about the session. From my side, I was interested in getting more insights from Michael on the different mappings that were presented, and maybe if you can reflect on whether you feel it is in line with Ricardo's presentation, or what you think about it. And Ricardo, my question, my question was, what did you observe from the retail side in terms of difference in assortments in vegetables and fruits?
Different what?
Between the different categories of retailers, did you find differences in assortments of vegetables and fruits?
Just tell me which kind of mapping, like the general mapping of the food system, or for the value chain in Hanoi, you mean? Okay. Maybe we shall get back quickly to the slides, I don't know. Yeah, sure, because I would need the slides. Please answer first.
Whether there is more assortment of products depending on the retail type, that's your question. So let me be very ambiguous about it. Yes and no. To a certain degree, yes. Mom and pops type of store have less assortment than informal and formal wet markets, for sure. But to a certain degree, also within informal and formal wet markets, there is a little bit of a specialization. Like, for example, there are people who only sell fruits, or mostly fruits, right? Fruit sellers. So they have a wide assortment, but only fruits, while other types of markets, like the moms and pops, try to have a more varied, less amount of fruits, but then they also have vegetables and other products. So I'm not sure if I responded what you're requesting, so that's why I said I'm very ambiguous. Yes and no, depending how you see it. Now, any of you?
Yeah, just to get back, this is the one you want to discuss. So actually this was done by our partners based on the data that we collected together and based on the first sketches that I drafted first. So they tried to simplify it. And also the goal was to evaluate a bit the flows, the volumes, but we don't have any statistics regarding that, so it's more like an approximation. So, and also this, we have discussed this, this map at Favri last week, and we have some debate, and of course it needs to be corrected and improved. The main idea is that most of the vegetables, especially in the winter, come from the Red River Delta, and even more from the province of Hanoi and the surrounding provinces. And then another big bunch of the vegetable come from like the northern provinces, northwestern provinces, central provinces, and a bit less also from the southern regions. And then the main channels coming from abroad, it's mostly from China, and so crossing the border at two main entry points like Laokai and Mongkai. Here only Mongkai is mentioned, but I mean there are other entry points, but all that it's mostly informal, so it's very hard to get to know the official, I mean the actual volume. So it's based also on the interviews we made in the wholesale market. We were questioning the wholesalers about their procurement, but of course also sometimes wholesalers won't tell that the onions come from China. It's always better to say that it comes from Vietnam and it's safe and there is traceability, whereas sometimes it's not the case. So, well, so it's pretty difficult to evaluate exactly the main flows and the volumes, but it's just to give a general idea. So how the food is flowing from the areas of production to the city. Yeah, that's what we wanted to show, that the centrality of the wholesale markets. Of course, there are also some direct connections. It's not mentioned here because the project is focused on wholesale markets, so we wanted to show how wholesale markets are important. On the first draft that I did, I tried to show also the direct connections between producers and distributors, the fact that sometimes producers sell directly in the street markets, like often ladies coming with Morning Glory or water spinach and so on from their own production, selling them in the morning, like 50 to 40 bunches of vegetable, and then they go back to their peri-urban district and cultivate their field in the afternoon and do that every day of the week. And of course also some collectors deliver also directly to some retail points. That's something that Ricardo also mentioned. Also some retailers at the wet markets live in the countryside, so some of their neighbors are producing vegetables, so in the morning they collect the vegetables from the neighbors and they bring them to their retail market. But also what is important, what is interesting is the fact that there can be several procurement channels, like one retailer can get, for instance, the onions or the squashes from the wholesale markets, and can bring the green or the cabbage that is cultivated by his or her neighbor in their native village, and then can be delivered some water Morning Glory by a producer who will like roam around the market of the district to distribute his or her production. So. But so that was a question I wanted to ask you, Ricardo, because in your table about procurement, is it like the percentage of volume sold, or is it the percentage of shops? Because so the question is like in your questionnaire, could they answer many? Could they give many answers about the procurement? Because sometimes they combine like a direct procurement from the production area. Procurement from the wholesale market, from a rural broker, and so on. So,
yeah, and actually, just to be clear, this doesn't include the weight of the volume, actually. So, because this is a very preliminary analysis, so we're basically just doing a quick assessment of the section that captures the information about commercialization when they buy the different type of actors that they mention when they're buying products. But we still have to do a little bit more analysis because we can segregate this by product. And for each product, we ask, for example, because, even if you buy, let's say, I don't want to say Morning Glory because that's passion fruit. If you buy passion fruit, for example, it's very nutritious, by the way. Not necessarily everything that you buy comes from one buyer or one type of buyer, right? So we did ask these questions about what are the top 3 sources for each specific product, and then trying to get a share of more or less of this type of supplier among what they buy. Now, I just wanted to point out something that you said that I found it very surprising in our survey. I was not expecting that. And it's a point that you just mentioned, is that when we did the assessment and at the beginning with the census, realizing the high share of especially informal retailers, which is the great majority, that actually said that they produce their own product that they sell. I was really not expecting that. So that was a surprise for me, which is part of what you were mentioning.
These are also like some survey that we didn't mention in our street food project. We did some interviews with street sellers, and especially itinerant sellers, and most of the women like selling, especially actually leafy vegetables, sell their own production. And then it's also seasonal, but they can also sell some zucchini, some cabbage in the winter, but and then they can get some extra procurement from the wholesale market also. But many of them, especially for vegetables, sell their own production. Yeah.
Dark green leafy vegetables, especially.
Dark green vegetables.
Because they are from the area.
Exactly. But then it's also very seasonal. I mean.
Oleg. Oh. Someone give a microphone to Oleg.
Just so we monitor Long Bien market for import and of fruit from China and anywhere, and what we found out, something like 2016-17, we had the high volume. All of a sudden, 18 or a little bit, it really dropped dramatically. Can be all 1 year before, I think. So for example, pear or peach or everything like drop dramatically. But if we also have the retail, we look at the retail level, and actually that product was still there. And for example, we also noticed pear from South Africa, which we never noticed in Long Bien market. So we finished project, so we couldn't really follow. But it was all of a sudden this indication that this system which were in place for so long, that everything going through Long Bien, and you monitor Long Bien, you know what's happening. It seems to me it was changing. There was more things going directly for, let's say, supermarket, maybe just from importer in Haiphong or somewhere, just go to supermarkets, never go to Long Bien. But even Chinese product, it seems they're starting to find different ways. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I would say that in the retail markets, most of the products come from wholesale markets, especially for fruits. But then, of course, in supermarkets, they have their own procurement channels, dealing directly with producers or dealing directly with importers or importing themselves. I mean, Vin Group has its own importing unit, connecting directly to exporters in foreign countries. And actually, there are also a lot of importers where some are based in Long Bien, but actually there are some importers that have their warehouse outside of Long Bien and who are selling their products to a lot of convenience stores. Maybe, Tanok, you want to say a few words about imports and so on? Imports of fruits and...
I was just going to say, just quickly, not yet, but we will, I hope, because in our data, we did collect information whether the product was coming from China for all the different products, right? But specifically, we have a section that was all about asking carefully, right? Because if you ask, does this come from China? They will say no, right? But trying to find ways to ask the question whether they knew whether the product that is sold comes or not from China. And not just that, also perceptions about food safety of the product, perception about Viet Gap, for example, as well, safe products, but hopefully we will. I don't, not yet.